IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat. Ni hao, Huaning Dajia. Welcome to All Things Policy, everyone. If you were a little bit confused about what I just did, that was me perhaps threatening national security. At least I didn't want to, but at least I think I did. Because this is a conversation about learning Chinese in India and the role of so-called Confucius institutes and the recent controversy around them. While we're recording on a Friday, August 7th, we learned that yesterday the Education Ministry had a meeting in India talking about the future of Confucius institutes. And this comes obviously amid reports that India is looking at curtailing the activities of Confucius institutes in India. So we thought we'll spend some time to talk about what these institutes are, what they do, and why they've aroused so much controversy around the world and now in India. So to do this, to have this conversation with me, I have my colleagues Suyash Desai and Pranay Kotasthane, along with Hamsini Hariharan, who's the host of States of Anarchy and part of Takshashila's broader family. All three Mandarin speakers, Pranay and Hamsini, also Mandarin readers and writers. So welcome, folks. Welcome to this conversation.
Bajaha.
All right. So Hamsini, I'm going to go to you first. You've done research on Confucius Institutes. So just first give us a background about what these institutes are, how they operate, and what sort of nefarious activities are they engaged in.
Okay, thanks, Manoj. Thanks for having me. So Confucius Institutes are basically to China what the British Council or the Max Muller Bhavan or the Alliance Française is. And what they essentially do is teach languages. They also carry on a range of soft power and cultural activities. And how they're set up is different from any other public diplomacy organization in that they're set up between Hanban, which is under the Chinese Education Ministry, and a university in the host country, like India. And so the Confucius Institute is set up on the headquarters of the university. And what they essentially do is teach the language and so on. They have come under a lot of criticism, not only in India, but around the world for spreading nefarious activities, for being a cover for intelligence operatives from the Chinese army, for restricting academic freedom, and so on. And the Chinese government is very cognizant of that. They're sort of currently rebranding themselves. So now Hanban is going to spin off into a separate organization, and they're saying that this is going to be independent and so on. But they're still, at the end of the day, the Confucius Institutes are problematic because they have a lot of links to the Chinese Communist Party and to disseminate propaganda and conduct espionage and monitor overseas Chinese students and so on. So that is the basic problem with the Confucius Institutes.
So these are run by the Education Ministry, right? They come under the Chinese Ministry of Education, right?
Yes, they do come under the Chinese Ministry of Education, and they're set up in partnership with the university.
All right. So what is the presence of these institutes in India? What is across the length and breadth of India, how have they sort of infiltrated our mind space?
So the thing about the Confucius Institutes in India is that we have the least number of them in the world. So I thought only two were running, Mumbai and Vellore University. But I think there are a few others in OP Jindal and maybe Lovely Professional University. But irrespective of it, that number is in single digits. And the number of people learning Mandarin in India is very small. And I'm not sure it will have a huge effect except on our own Indian scholarship because it's Indians who are primarily at these universities.
All right. So, Pranay, I want to come to you now. Given that there is just a handful of them, two is what we know of, and the others also we're not entirely sure about. And you've been to one of these institutes in India, right? So, what did you identify while you were there?
Taja, how? Osha, Pranay. Manoj, but I want to start with a joke first. Can I?
Sure.
Yeah. So, my joke was China, Confucianism and India, Confucianism. Okay. I think I should type it. It will be a better. But anyways, so get started with, actually Hamsini and I both are HSK 4 students. We gave exams in a Confucian Institute center at Vellore Institute. So the thing that I observe, and I'm going against our previous trend of not talking about anecdotes, but this is an anecdote just to highlight what we saw there. So first of all, unlike the Max Muller Bhavan or the French institutes which are there in India, these institutes don't function independently like Hamsini mentioned. So they are basically in partnership with a university. So in Vellore, what we saw is that there is one small space in the ground floor of the building where this Confucius Institute is sort of located. They have an exam center, and they were just about 2 or 3 people, 2 really young Chinese people who were sort of interns who were doing the teaching there. So as part of the courses that VIT offers, they also have an option of for people to pick up Chinese as well in their engineering courses, etc. So there were some people who take those courses, and they also conduct the exam, which is the HSK exam, which is the basic proficiency test like TOEFL for English, etc., which Chinese Ministry of Education and Culture conduct. So HSK exams are conducted by them. So there are exam conduct places there for verbal exam and for written exams. That's pretty much it. It's not a big operation like it is there in many other countries. It's just 2 or 3 people, young people running an institute and doing some exam center. So that's what I observe. So on that, Manoj, I wanted to ask you, why are Confucius Institutes a problem in so many countries? And how does that map with what we see here in India?
So, I mean, like you guys have pointed out, right, there's a very limited presence in India, and even like Hamsini said, very few people in India learning the language. Across the world, there's been a number of different reasons, but predominantly, like Hamsini said, it's about this increasing sense of unease with Chinese influence, however you want to categorize influence. One thing is about cultural influence and the fear of curtailing academic freedom. We've seen protests in places like Canada, the US, Australia, where Chinese students have protested against what they feel is misrepresentation of Chinese history, or when a discussion over Taiwan has come up, or a discussion over Hong Kong, or even discussions over Xinjiang. And we've seen protests, we've seen sort of the Chinese embassy in some of these countries intervening, pushing universities not to hold certain events, invite certain peoples. Doesn't have much to do with Confucius Institutes in that sense. But the link comes with it starts with sort of the US and Australia and these countries. In the US, there were hundreds of universities where you had Confucius Institutes. I was checking the data, and a significant number of them. So over the past 6 years, about 29 at least of more than 100 universities in the US that had Confucius Institutes have closed them. Most of these closures happened after essentially the government sort of not quite subtly told them that, we'll restart language funding for you under the Department of Defense, but you need to close this. And the concern about closing this comes from partly the sense of influence over debate, but also, like Hamzani said, espionage. In Sweden, in Belgium, there have been concerns about espionage. Although the case in Belgium was very interesting because the gentleman over there was completing his tenure as the head of the Confucius Institute in Brussels. But he was then sort of identified and said he's a spy, and they wanted to throw him out. And then he went to court, and eventually this man who's a professor, he won his case in court. So now he's allowed to sort of travel visa free within the European Union Schengen area. So it tells you a little bit about anxiety, with some cases where there is some linkages to sort of, or at least some concerns with regard to espionage. How well developed these concerns are, how airtight some of these allegations are, is anybody's it's still sort of open. But at least there is this sense, and that is why this crackdown has happened across the board, because the sense is that the Chinese are using these for all these other purposes. I find it fascinating when people say, this is a soft power tool. because it clearly is not serving to expand Beijing's soft power. In India also, I was engaging with certain university professors the other day, and they mentioned this to me in our conversation about, how, but this is a tool for soft power. And I said, this is a fascinating tool for soft power, given that if you look at surveys repeatedly, even before the last few months of issues at the LSE, Chinese favorability, the way Indians view China, the favorability of China in Indian perception was among the lowest in the world. The only country lower than us was Japan at 19%. We were at 23%. So I can't fathom what sort of a brilliant soft power tool this is that it's resulting in such outcomes.
Yeah, reverse soft power. Yeah.
But I wanted to now sort of come to what the government is actually doing. So we don't exactly know what they're going to do, right? They've not said that they're going to ban these or they're going to limit their activities in some way or the other. From what I understand from the media reportage is that the Education Ministry met with 7 institutions running Confucius Institutes in the country, which included OP Jindal, VIT, and even Lovely Professional University. This is what I can read from the Indian Express's reportage. I wanted to get a sense of why do we think the government is doing this? And in this, Suresh, I wanted to first bring you in. What do you think is prompting this, given that I don't think that we've seen any such specific case of, allegation of espionage or even something like close to that in India, or even allegation of interference in academic freedom in India. So I wanted to get your sense first, Suresh, on this. Why do you think the government is doing this, and what do you think it wants to achieve?
There are 2-3 points, Manoj. First one is taking a baton from experiences from Australia and US. Yes, there has been no major or significant event indicating academic obstruction of academic freedom. But yes, as Pranay has mentioned, Confucius Institutes generally have 2 or 3 interns. But how can we not say that these are used as a connecting links between students and Chinese back in the country, Ministry of Education there or MSS there. So yet it is not yet proven, but in this may be some of the insecurities that the government of India has, and especially given the recent crisis, the hostility can increase. That's one. Point number 2, because due to the lack of Indian options of fighting back to China, we cannot fight back militarily. We can fight back up to an extent of status quo. But due to the lack of economic options, these are some options which can make more noise. So I think due to the lack of economic options and due to insecurities which are spread around the world, these are 2 important factors which has led to the review of current policy towards Confucius Institutes in India.
That's interesting. So what you're saying, a corollary to what you're saying is that it actually, doing something like this actually, given the lack of any specific cases, reflects in some ways free riding on global sort of concern, while also exposing the fact that we don't have particularly many other instruments to deal with what is Chinese aggression.
Correct.
Pranay, I want to get your thoughts on that.
No, I completely disagree with that. I mean, if the word Suyash used was insecurity, I think that is right. We are looking at this from a frame of insecurity, but there is really no reason to be insecure of people learning a language, any other language, right? I mean, how can we be so insecure that these are going to hurt Indian interests? And as I mentioned that the operations are really limited. I spoke to the person who was at the Confucius Institute. It's really difficult for them to get a visa as well. So I think we are already doing what needs to be done to control, to see that this is not a big institution which might in the future, be used as an instrument of propaganda that India can't manage. So that's already being done. I don't see any reason why it should be restricted further. Now, coming to the fact that saying that we don't have any options, that's like resigning even before a battle is fought. I am sure India has options. It's not as if Indian strategists have been, not thinking about China for the last 60, 70 years. I'm sure there are instruments to hurt in China in a way that can lead to at least put a question in their court as to why have they been doing aggression towards India, right? And anyway, look at it this way. If we stop Indian students from learning a language which we clearly don't have expertise on, how is it going to lead to benefits for India itself? I don't think there are any benefits, right? And I want to draw this from the current example. Just look at what happened with Galwan incident, right? Something happened from the Chinese end, and all Indian writing, all Indian popular thing was asking questions inwards, right? We were looking at, oh, did we do something wrong? Did India's August 5 move last year trigger this? Did the road which is being built to DBO lead to this? Or did we redrawing the map lead to this? I mean, come on, there are like hundreds of expressions that we were trying to look at, and all explanations were trying to see as Indian actions leading to this. Why did this happen? My hypothesis is this happens because we don't have a sufficient understanding of the Chinese state, the Chinese society, the Chinese market, etc. Right? So it is important for India to understand the adversary better. I mean, that's what Sun Tzu's statement also is, right? You need to understand the adversary better. Even Arthashastra says that. So how can we stop an instrument for ourselves to learn an adversary? That seems completely counterproductive to me.
Pranay, you saved yourself by invoking Arthashastra after invoking Sun Tzu.
Yeah. But I'm trying to balance it out, Manoj. Things are sensitive now.
But so on that point, I actually take that point very well, and therefore I would like to sort of suggest by making a slight little plug-in by saying, please go and read my columns on in the Hindustan Times on this particular issue. I did not blame India. They were about what my sense of what Chinese views were and why they acted based on domestic dynamics. But Hamsini, I want to come to you. The same sort of question with regard to how do you see what the government is talking about right now? But I want to add one more thing to this. There's been some conversation among sort of groups where I am part of China Watchers, where I hear things like, well, it's all right. It's not like we need them to come and teach us. There are wonderful language teachers in India itself, or we could work with Taiwan. Or so much so as, where is the reciprocity? Who's learning Hindi or the multiple other Indian languages in China? And if they are not going to reciprocate, why should we? How do you sort of rate all these arguments along with the sort of first thoughts of what the government is doing?
Okay. Manoj, before I get into your question, I was thinking about what Suresh was saying. And I think my response to that is when we say, okay, how do we know that these institutes are setting up links between people, right? Is that the way that Hanban sets up Confucius Institutes is that they set it up in, say, Vellore, and they set it up in a partner university in China. So the idea is that they will have exchange between universities overseen by Hanban. It's problematic on several counts, but that is the idea behind it, that you have larger partnership between the universities. And I think at the end of the day, Australia and the US have different security problems that arise from the Chinese present there. And they have huge numbers of Chinese diaspora who flock to the Confucius Institutes in those countries, which is not the same here. When it comes to sort of reciprocity in learning and saying, oh, we can get teachers from Taiwan and so on. As someone who studied under Indian teachers teaching Chinese, let me tell you that there is a huge problem with it. When I went to China, Manoj, my roommate had actually started learning Chinese since she was 15. She's American. She started learning Chinese when she was 15. And when she was 18, she got a full scholarship to study. And she's she has 8 years of Chinese proficiency. And she's straight to go to a PhD. And that's kind of stuff that I'm just envious of because Indians don't have the opportunity to do that. The other thing is you can't really look at reciprocity. India has 22 national languages. We can't be like, okay, show me proficiency in Odia, show me proficiency in Santali, and then I'll let Confucius Institutes come up. But to that effect, anecdotally, I have actually met a Tamilian teacher who teaches Tamil in the Beijing Foreign Language Studies University. And he teaches Tamil to several researchers who are studying there. It's just one of those things. Going back, I think there is no sort of substitute. I think the bigger pool of teachers you have, the better is the education that you get. And that is something that we sorely need, as Pranay pointed out. And the second thing is, I don't think we should be looking for reciprocity. If the Chinese don't know anything about the Indians, then good for us.
Fair enough. That's actually a very valuable point. If they don't know anything about this, good for us in some ways. On this point of sort of soft power, I wanted to sort of, Hamsini, just get a little bit from you further on this. what are the other activities apart from language that do these Confucius institutes engage in any other activities apart from language teaching?
So in India, as far as I know, it's extremely limited. So they organize some competitions, which are again related to like the Chinese language. But apart from that, I think it's very limited. I think they celebrate like Chinese New Year and some festivals. But other than that, I don't see anything else happening. It's not like they're doing like lectures or plays or anything like that.
Yeah, Hamsini, do they make us read Xi Jinping's book?
Unfortunately, no. I remember when Pranay and I went to VIT, we saw like the portraits of Mao and Xi on the Weller Institute, Confucius Institute. And that was the first time we'd sort of seen these portraits, I think, in a building in India. And I think, you know what, like banning Confucius Institutes heavily discounts how smart Indians are. Indians are not going to easily fall for propaganda. So you can't really patronize them and say, oh, people don't know between good and bad. You let people make up their own choices.
Yeah. Actually, Hamsini, again, I want to quote. I'm in a very quoting mood today. So there is a quote by Mahatma Gandhi that I want to put here. Okay. So he said in a speech which comes out of confidence about our own culture and values, right? So he wrote in a letter to Tagore. He said that I do not want my house to be walled on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. I refuse to live in other people's houses as an interloper, a beggar, or a slave. So I think that sort of summed up for me that we should be able to have confidence in some people teaching us a language and that not being affecting us, right? We get to know our adversary better. That should be our way of looking at it rather than looking at it from a lens of really being very touchy and sensitive about.
All right. It's interesting that you spoke about cultural confidence because that's exactly something that Xi Jinping talks about, although in a completely different context altogether, where he actually talks about promoting your own culture as part of cultural confidence, as opposed to having the confidence to be open to everybody else. But Suyash, I want to sort of get you into this for the sort of last round of conversation about looking at the government's policy. So if you think back for the last 3 years now, we've sort of seen a shift where people to people and cultural linkages was supposed to be the centerpiece of India-China ties. I mean, when that first informal summit happened and then the second one happened, the only tangible sort of outcome from those, at least that we could see in terms of public documents, was that we are going to focus on people to people ties and we're going to try and this year we were supposed to have these 70 cultural events marking the 70 years of the India-China relationship. It seems slightly, I'm being polite by saying slightly, but it seems flimsy when within a span of very little time with no specific input on something like this, you turn around what you said was a central pillar of your policy because people-to-people connectivity does not exist. India and China have a deep degree of mistrust. So I want to sort of frame the question to you in this context. How do you therefore view what the government is doing right now?
First of all, the point on Confucius Institute, I'm saying the same thing. The problem is not with propaganda. Propaganda, we can handle it very well. The problem is with espionage, and this can act. Confucius Institutes can act as a connecting mechanism between the university students and back then in the CCP. That's one.
So can business, right?
I agree. But business up to a certain extent. The Confucius Institute is a proven example in Australia and US.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's point number one.
No, even businesses, I mean, how can, so that's why we should stop any linkages with that state, any arm of that state?
No, that's not the case. Though we are stopping some businesses actually on application-based businesses model, mobile application-based business model. Yes, we are stopping some of them. But when national security comes into picture, again, I will be viewed as hawkish here, but it should take precedence. That is my personal view on this.
No, okay. I just want to highlight one more point, Suresh. We have to differentiate between intentions and consequences. Okay, intentions of the government can be anything, right? I mean, always government intentions are good. So in this case, the intentions might not be to stop people from learning or propaganda, and intentions might be to like you said, it might be just because this is an option to exercise. But we should measure policies by consequences. Intentions are hard to judge. What will be the consequence of this is what a question needs to be asked. So consequence of this will be there will be fewer Indians who would be learning the language, fewer Indians who would be
But we have other options, right? We can, for example, out of 5 institutes that have been highlighted, only 2 are associated with Confucius institutes. For example, Jindal is associated with Taiwan. So we could explore other options. It's not the case that we don't have options.
Actually,
If
we need to have 200, not 2 or 3. So we need to think on those lines, not about restricting others.
that is a larger policy issue. There are so many institutes in Taiwan which can give us, which we can. I'm sure they will be more than happy to sign a MOU with us.
sorry, I disagree with you here just on the point that there actually isn't, there's very little Chinese language learning. Pranay and I both did it from sort of private institutes in Bangalore, and our pool was that small. We could either hire like a private tutor, or we could go to like I think 1 or 2 schools, and that pool has remained small because of policies like this that restrict people from learning and thus discourage them from learning. And I think it's very easy to say, oh, then we should expand that pool. But you aren't letting Indians also take up that initiative because you don't know when the next thing is going to be.
Yeah, Hamsin, and just to continue, I think the fact that a university which was teaching through a Taiwan teaching center is being called into this meeting just highlights the fact that the circle of rejection and circle of suspicion keeps expanding, right? So first it is CCP, so Confucius Institute. Now the entire Chinese language itself will be thought of as being propagating something that you don't want Indians to learn.
I agree with the part on CCP, the Taiwanese, OP Jindal getting into this, being fetched into this. But coming back to the question that Manoj asked, I think 70 years of celebration, 70 issues. I'm not sure whether we will be celebrating 70 different functions, but I'm sure we will be celebrating 7 months of this standoff, looking at what is happening around. Or at least we'll be talking about 7 months of this standoff. And surely it will not work. As in, the 70-year mark was started, the celebration started in April and we went into a standoff in late April, early May. So I don't think we will be able to commemorate our 70th issue with 70 anniversaries. And
yeah, I mean, my point is not so much about that. My question was essentially about looking at, you spent 3 years building this people-to-people connectivity as the key pillar of your relationship, or at least that's what the government told us since 2018, where it said that there is lack of trust, and for that you need to engage more at the highest levels, but also at a people-to-people level. And then therefore we need to do all these things, which is universities and everything. To turn around at a moment of when obviously for any there is a security threat and there is all of that, but also this is a product of your trust in other issues, not just trust, but also strategic issues. How much weight should then one put in some of these policies when government says that we need to encourage people-to-people engagement and things like that? It just seems kind of strange that within a blink of an eye, you turn around what is the central pillar of your policy.
So that's right. No, so we made the same mistakes again 3 years back because as I was reading Indrani Bagchi's interview, Jaishankar's interview with Indrani Bagchi, where he has pointed out in his book that was related to his book, where he has pointed out that we share such a long 4,000 kilometers border with China. Unless these issues are resolved, we cannot just bypass them and get around other issues. These issues should be central to our discussion, which has not happened in past years. At least India tried to raise it, but China did not respond. So these issues should come. Other activities will happen, but these issues should be more central rather than just commemorating and bypassing these issues.
All right, so I'm going to take that bit and ask a last question to all three of you, starting with Pranay and then Hamsini and then Suyash finally. In that interview, Jaishankar also says that India needs to occupy more mind space of people in China, more of their mind space. If that's your long-term objective, does doing something like this really help? Hamsini?
No, I don't think that it occupies mind space in any way because it's too negligible to sort of make a difference. Yeah, maybe we had more Confucius Institutes or more students or more partnerships with Chinese universities, then it could have made a difference, but we don't have that. Therefore, the only people this will hurt is the Indian people.
All right, Pranay?
I agree with Hamsini that the effect is marginal at best and at most it hurts India more than the gains that it achieves. So from that angle, yes. And even if you see it from the Chinese point of view, I mean, it is going to go into this territory of, India taking this into the realm of societal tensions and increasing, looking everything from that reciprocity angle, rather than it being a state-to-state confrontation that should be managed.
All right. Suyash, last thoughts to you?
Of course, I disagree on this. I think this is one of the many steps which could be pivotal in occupying Chinese mindsets. This only, I agree with it, it's very negligent, but other steps like mobile application bans, and I'm sure they're reviewing other steps. All of them together will certainly play up to a certain extent, depending upon how much leverage does India have. We have to look, this is a more detailed question where we have to look what leverages does India have, and such steps would play more on, all of them together will play more on Chinese mind.
Okay, so according to you, this is one piece of the big puzzle that we need to put together to put pressure on China.
Yes.
All right. So with that, I'm going to thank all three of you. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. And to the listeners, I'd like to say Saijan Phangyao and Shishini, thank you for listening to us. Thank you, folks.
Yeah, Manoj.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. So it's been a really, really fun week this week. We've had a great episode with Anand on Cyrus Says. Anand was one of the writers of Bahubali, and it's done some really, really fun stuff since that. Ashish Vidyarthi also had a really good episode on his show, Begin the Journey. Please do check that out. You do know Yuddha is back, right? Definitely check it out if you haven't. Yuddha is our show about Indian ancient warfare. It's hosted by Anirudh Kanisetti and Aditya Ramnathan. Really, really great show. You should check that out for sure. And I forgot, Rishikesh was on the network as well. He was on Absolutely Right with Aditi Sarana. Do definitely check that out. With that, hope to see you next week.
Are you constantly seeking happiness? Wondering how to make the most of every day? How not to let your inhibitions stop you from achieving your goals? It's now time to get your A-game on. It's time to unlock your true potential. Tune in to the Empowering series with me, Zarina Poonawalla, to feel empowered in all genres of life. From behavioral skills to management skills. From health to relationships. From mental well-being to emotional well-being. And of course, your finances. I've got you covered. With these tips and tricks from me, Zarina, and true life stories from my amazing guests, you're bound to bring your purest to the table. Tune in to the Empowering series with Zarina Poonawalla every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.